Well, L4FR clothing should be your go-to for quality, affordability, safety, and style. L4FR was founded by a third-generation oil field worker who is also a veteran. Thus, this company has a deep appreciation for reliability and longevity, all while we provide first-rate customer service. Our durable apparel will serve you well for many years to come, whether you're working on a pipeline, a lineman climbing utility poles, or in any other environment requiring fire-resistant apparel. L4FR has you covered. Our apparel is tough enough to resist hazardous conditions while still providing high comfort and style. L4FR provides clothing options to ensure your safety and comfort, whether you're on the job or not. To view our complete inventory of flame-resistant garments, please visit our online store at l4frclothing.com or give us a call at 817-757-4935. This special episode of OutDrank The Coverage, the live draft show, is brought to you by the Frisco Bar and Grill. They're located at 6750 Gaylord Parkway, Suite 120 in Frisco. You can find them online at thefriscobar.com. I'm telling you, folks, if you're a sports fan, a karaoke fan, or a fan of live music and trivia, this is the place you want to be. They not only have great food, great drinks, they have great prices, and they have a great atmosphere. I'm telling you, this is where old friends meet and new friends are found. I promise you, you will love the Frisco Bar and Grill. Intern Noah and I will be talking about it during the draft show, but we love their appetizers. We love their wings. I love their sliders. My girlfriend loves the karaoke. Hey, if you're a fan of Oklahoma Sooners or San Francisco 49ers, the Frisco Bar and Grill is the official watch party place for both of those. And intern Noe and I was there for a Monday night game last year when San Francisco was playing, and the atmosphere is absolutely amazing. You cannot beat it. So check out the Frisco Bar and Grill, located at 6750 Gaylord Parkway, Suite 120 in Frisco. We're old. Just like the 1988 season, today has been total ass. Hello, everybody. Terry Bennett, intern Noe, OutDrank The Coverage. A look back at the 1986 through 91 Dallas Cowboys. If it sounds like we've talked about this before, it's because we have. You know, it wouldn't be as big of a deal if it went back, on the 92 Cowboys. We can talk a lot of fun stuff, but yeah. I was getting kind of depressed about what we were talking about. But before we do that, for the second time, we're already supposed to do this 3 times. We're going to now do this 4 times. Hello, intern Noe. How are you doing? And what are you drinking?
Hello, Terry. I'm doing well. I'm doing less sober than I was 48 minutes ago.
This might be a good day of shows for some people.
I am drinking Hirsch Kentucky Straight Bourbon. It's one that I'm trying to, in my attempt once again to get you to like whiskey. I think this is the one you actually do like.
This was really good.
Yeah, if I was going to get someone into whiskey, this is probably the one I'm going to do. But yeah, it's smooth, has that bourbon flavor, low 40% ABV. But yeah, I love it. And I'm just be sipping on that with some Gatorade Zero to, also.
Now we're in catch-up mode.
Yeah.
So
I might need another one of these.
Yeah, exactly. I'm drinking Frio. By the way, you're right, though. The whiskey that you gave me today is absolutely amazing. That's what I think of when I think of like sitting and watching a movie and drinking or watching football or by the fire, talking politics and complaining how the white people have been held down for far too long. That's the whiskey I want to drink, but
we'll have to redo this show again.
Yeah, we're about to this is gonna go a different way. Fox News, Hannity and Terry. So what happened was basically we were 35 to 45 minutes into this show, and we realized we had an audio issue that the video that I'll be playing. In fact, I'll go ahead and start that now with no audio. The video I was playing, the audio was overtaking us. And so we thought about, hey, we can just not do this show because this is not fun. It's fun to talk about because it's sports, but this is the dark era of the Cowboys.
Yeah.
In fact, you know what? Now that you've done the research, and don't worry, folks, the moving of the cameras, I'm just trying to figure out the best view for y'all to see the video and us as we talk. And I know you weren't a fan. You were 5 years old at this point, but darker times.
Yeah.
86 to 91, or say 90, or no, we'll say 89. 86 to 90 or 2000 to 2005?
I would say, this is a really good question.
Yeah.
I really probably, I wish you asked me before we
Yeah,
started the
I
show.
wish I'd have thought about that, put it on the show notes.
So I experienced 2000 and 2005. I would probably say 86 to 89 because
It completely bottomed out.
it completely bottomed out. At least with the 2000s, you could see them, okay, tank a few years, get draft picks.
Get the salary cap fixed.
Yeah. Campo was just a replacement coach.
Well, that was you've
like a filler.
earned it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you've earned this. You need to do this,
So you knew that they could go in the right direction with the right coach, which in 2003 they ended up going in that right direction. But with 86, yeah,
did that? We'll talk about that next year, actually.
Yeah. So with 86 to 89, they were kind of living off the laurels of the mid 70s draft picks that were paying off, and those guys were big time contributors for them throughout the 80s. Randy White, Too Tall, and all of them. But now they really didn't add anything else to that roster, and now they're getting old and slow. Now, the first half of 86, they looked pretty exciting.
Yeah.
The first half of 86 reminded me of the first 3 games of the 99 season, where it looked like this team could probably make the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
You don't want to say it, but like they beat the Giants and the Redskins, 2 teams that played in the conference championship games the following season.
Yep.
So you just had to assume that at some point, or no, this same season.
Yeah, same season.
Yeah, Giants and Redskins. So you at some point it's like, think, okay, they probably do belong among the upper echelon in the NFC. So I felt for the first half of the 86 that they were going to be going to this after reviewing this. I know you watched this.
Yeah.
So you probably were thinking the same thing too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they felt, so one of the negatives that had happened after the 85 season, I think, first off, everybody that knew football, and at 10 years old, I knew football because I've told you this from day one. This is the worst, best team of the Cowboys championships or the division champs. They won because of Tom Landry, but they lost because of Tom Landry.
Yeah.
I have a book that's wrote about Joe Gibbs, Bill Parcells, and Bill Walsh, and it's a great book, and I've told you about it many times. And part of that, it just goes over their career, and they all 3, even Bill Walsh talks about like what Landry meant. Like that was the hurdle. That's why I say I think people kind of underrate Landry now. I don't think they realize how innovative Landry was. I mean, he literally created the 4-3 and then created the defense or the offense to beat the 4-3. And so there's a part about that 85 season, and both Gibbs and Parcells was like, yeah, he just outcoached us. Like we went in for whatever reason, we went into those games in that year in our mind down 14-0. We were overcoaching. And Landry that was like the perfect team for him because it wasn't a lot of superstars doing their own thing. It was a lot of aging players who had realized work inside the system. And I think 85 might have been one of Landry's most enjoyable years as a coach because he wins and he wins his way. But back-to-back losses in the playoffs, not back-to-back year-wise because it was 83 and 85, but back-to-back losses to L.A., a team with Eric Dickerson, and they basically, the first game was pretty close. I think it was like 24-17, but the second one was a shutout. Dallas didn't score. And so going into 86, he'd handed over the offense to Paul Hackett, who we would now later on realize is not a great head coach, and his son isn't either, apparently, but really good offensive coach, really good offensive coordinator. And so he took over 86, man, and they came out firing, dude.
Yeah.
Like it just felt like this is the Cowboys that I grew up with. We're going to roll. They go into the year and their first game is New York Monday night, and they beat them 31-28. And then they beat the Lions 31-7. And then they lost to the Falcons. And that was a weird one. But let's remember, we were just talking about, it's funny, you and I were talking about this when you got here today, and we're getting our drinks and stuff ready for the shows, about how we're in an era now where only championships matter. And that's great, but you forget all the really good teams that were fun to watch that just didn't quite make it. Atlanta was one of those from about 77 to about 84, 85. That Steve Barkowski, the Grits Blitz, Jerry Glanville as defensive coordinator, they were just an absolute fun team to watch. So anyway, they lose to them. And then they beat the Cardinals. They absolutely dominate them 31-7. They lose to Denver in Denver 29-14. They beat the Redskins. They beat the Eagles. They beat the Cardinals again. And that means they're 6-2. They're going into New York on a 1:00 game, noon Eastern time. And you've already played St. Louis twice. You've already beat the Redskins. You've already beat the Eagles. You beat the Giants. You've almost done. You're almost like, just don't completely lose every game of the year. Oh, wait, that's going to happen, isn't it? But don't lose every game of the year, and you're going to win the playoffs. You're going to at least make the playoffs. Danny White gets hurt in that game. And from that point on, it goes to crap. I want to tell you that this is what's frustrating about that game. So we all think about the 85 or the 80s Giants, 85, 86. That was a defensive team, right?
Right.
That was great. Dallas, even with Steve Pelor, because Danny White got hurt quick. Like, that's the one thing that it was the first drive. Steve Pelor and the Cowboys had 408 total yards, outgained the Giants by 200 yards, had 25 first downs to the Giants' 14 first downs. But
I was going to say, can I guess?
What?
Turnovers?
Actually, sacks.
Oh, well,
but turnovers too. Well, actually, both teams had 3 turnovers, but
okay.
sacks. It was sacks. Man, I can remember Steve Pelor. Well, also Danny White, because he got sacked, and that's what broke his wrist. But Steve Pelor, I can see why Landry thought Pelor could have been something. Like, he would make throws that would just wow. But
in that 6-2 run to start the season, he started 2 of those games.
Exactly, because Danny White had started to kind of become injury prone. He was just out a couple games. And also, let's be honest, that was just an era where quarterbacks were out. Like, just the way the game was played, you're gonna have a dude, be out a couple games every year. But yeah, so that right there, that's when everything went south. And so they started 6-2, they finished 1-7. You had brought up the point in the last show that we're having to redo. The offensive line was trash.
Yeah, they allowed 60 sacks for the season. Now, what kind of carried them through that 6-2 run was their defense was also getting sacks.
We were in an era where everybody was blitzing. I meant to talk about that in that last show that we did, where we talked about Dallas's secondary was very feast or famine.
We can get it right now.
Let's do it. But teams were just, everybody was sacking. I mean, everybody was sending that fifth guy, because that's just what you were doing at that point.
Yeah.
The wide receiver, defensive back rules had been relaxed in the late 70s, and you're starting to see teams. It's not coincidental that Terry Bradshaw became a better quarterback in 78 and 79 when the rules had changed. And so teams were like, well, how do we combat that? Well, let's just send that extra guy. So I kind of felt like everybody's offensive line was crap back then, except for San Francisco's and maybe Washington. Washington had a great line through the whole 80s.
Yeah, I mean, like you said in the other podcast, Jim Lachey, Joe Jacoby, Russ Grimm, and those are Hall of Fame players right there. I don't think all of them are in the Hall of Fame, but they're Hall of Fame top players.
That's because the offensive line doesn't get enough credit.
That's very true.
So we go into 87, and you're still feeling good as a Cowboy fan.
The big thing about 86 though. Well, one, the USFL had folded, so Dallas Cowboys got one of their players, Herschel Walker.
Yeah.
And then also, this is the first time in franchise history that there was no Pro Bowlers.
That's right. That's a good point. And there would have been if Danny White would have stayed healthy.
Yeah.
Again,
he would have been a fringe MVP.
Oh yeah, the way the season was going to come out, I actually totally agree with you, and I feel bad for Steve Pelor because he was just thrown into just an impossible point. But in that point in 86, where Danny White was 4-2, he had thrown 12 touchdowns and only 5 interceptions. I mean, he was on his way. Yeah. And Pelor played well in the 2 games he couldn't play. They won. I mean, they were 2-0 under Pelor. Yeah. But so you go into 87. Oh, hang on. Go back. So one of the negatives about the 1-7 finish, other than just being it's a 1-7 finish, is that Landry took that as Paul Hackett can't do this. I've got to take the offensive back. And that was the big mistake because, again, through 6 games, Danny White was basically averaging 2 touchdowns a game. You take that all day, every day. That offense was completely different. That offense looked like the 81 type offense where Dallas could go out and score 30, 40 points. Again, that 85 team was I just can't explain how that was just won on smoke and mirrors. Whenever I think smoke and mirrors, that's a term that we used to always use for Mike Zimmer's defense.
Yeah.
I think of the 85 Cowboys because they just
85. They got a lot of turnovers, but
yes,
they generated some pressure too.
yeah, because again, they were just sitting in the house. It was feast or famine. And so 80 starting into 87 though, even with all that, and again, I was a kid, so I don't really know what Paul Hackett. You still felt they were okay, and on paper, 87 doesn't look that bad.
Yeah,
87 they finished 7-8. Of course, there's the 24-day player strike. Only thing I really want to say about that is if they were going to do scabs, the NFL made the mistake of not committing to it. Baseball, the owners, give them credit, and I'm always for the unions. I still don't understand why people don't want players to get paid. But at least in 94, what baseball did after the World Series was canceled is they went into that next year like, we're using scabs. You're going to have to come to us. And it worked. But that was smart. They had time to where even if they would have played with scabs, yeah, it wouldn't have been as good, but I think people would have been fine with it because those guys went through a regular spring training and all that. In the NFL, they're like, let's take a week. Let's draft players. Let's start playing. I think that was the big mistake right there.
Yeah, that was a big mistake. Luckily, it didn't last long. Then week 3 they canceled.
I mean, you say that, but it did.
I mean, it was they canceled 1 week of the season, so it was a 15-game season. They played 2 full weeks, and then by week 6 they came to an agreement, but they had to play 1 more week just because of the timing.
Well, that's what the owner said. I still think, and again, said this in the last episode we did of the same part.
Yeah.
I think the owners thought that if they could get a big number that week of people watching, they could go back and say, we want to tweak this. Because the players won this strike as far as what they were wanting. Not 100%, but you started seeing Plan B free agency, which was the first free agency of anything.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about earlier. Like you look at that, the 85 roster. Well, that's most of the people that if they were still healthy were from 78, 79, because that's how it was. And I do get that idea of back then you were more connected to a team because of that. I get that.
Yeah.
I think it gets overrated because if most of the players that are great players still end up staying with their team in today's football, you have to parse it out like a Dalvin Cook. I feel like I think Minnesota's cutting him 2 years too early, but I get it. Like because of how much running backs make and the salary impact and everything.
Yeah.
I think the next big one is going to be quarterbacks, right or wrong, or have to make the decision. Do they want to make a lot of money or do they want to win a Super Bowl? Because I don't think you can do both. That's just not been proven consistently.
Well, I think the owners are going to make that decision for them.
Well, yeah, possibly, but I mean, it's gonna be on the players too, though, because there's gonna always be somebody that's gonna pay for a Deshaun Watson, a Dak Prescott,
but they're going to realize they're not going to get that return on their investment.
But it's
going to take a few years, but they'll realize it.
I think they realize it. Now, here's the problem. There's a fine line in between owners getting smart and collusion. And that's the issue. Don't do it. Don't. Go ahead, do it.
Collusion.
You're thinking Rodney.
I mean, we're going to do the League Season 4 podcast at some point today. But
7 episodes later. But no, but still, though, you see my point, though. Like, I get what you're saying, but it's going to be really hard. Owners really have their backs against the wall when it comes to this kind of stuff, because if they do make smart decisions, immediately everybody throws out collusion, like baseball a few years ago. Like, yeah. I get it. Like, again, I'm always for you make as much money as you can get, but you have to also understand that the owners at any time can be like, no, I don't want to pay that much. And you can say, well, it's collusion, or it's a bunch of owners going, wait a minute, the teams that have the highest salary usually don't win. Yeah. It's that perfect middle.
But anyway, you got Mahomes.
But that contract doesn't even look that bad now, because you realize now that we're out of the COVID and everything that the salary cap is going higher and higher.
And they have 2 Super Bowls. They've been to the Super Bowl 3 times.
They've been to 3. They've won 2. And I mean, if he doesn't go to another Super Bowl, that's successful.
Yeah, and then Jalen Hurts, he got a fat contract. The Eagles need to worry about him just staying upright, because right now he's built. I mean, if you look at his body, he's a strong lower body.
Let's look at that body.
But he can definitely get injured. if they don't build up that line, because they're starting to get old. Jason Kelsey is going to play one more year, maybe.
Well, and the Eagles are at that point. The same thing. Any team, even a team like Dallas. Again, aren't we supposed to be talking about the '80s? Anyway, you've got to make those decisions. I had a high school coach tell me, and it makes a lot of sense. It's not about your strengths; it's about hiding your weaknesses. And that's what the salary cap creates. You've got to decide, what do you want your strengths to be. You cannot, unless you draft 100%, you cannot be 100% strong. So where do you want your weaknesses to be? And that's where football is because of the soccer. I personally like that. Like, I get it. I get that Jerry Jones would, probably pay out the ass and Dallas could have won.
Kind of more of a team effort there. Especially with the front office.
And just the analytical side of me just enjoys what our team's going to do. I mean, how many times do you and I are Cowboy fans. We talk the NFL, but we talk Cowboys first. But you and I will send each other, the Jets and cap issues, just because that's fun articles. Like, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
Then I always go look at the roster and go, okay, where do you cut to keep? What do you want to keep and what are you going to cut?
Yeah.
But anyway, so where were we? Oh, the 87.
The 87 strike. So
87 strike happens.
I will say, just, before we go on a tangent, 15% of the players in the union, they cross the picket line.
Yes.
And then also TV ratings were down 20%.
Oh, dude, it was terrible, dude. I remember.
Yeah.
It was sandlot football. And again, it wasn't that the players were terrible. It's just that they had a week. And really, some of them didn't even have a week. I mean, they were churning those rosters just like they do every day.
That week 3 that was canceled was basically all the teams getting the replacement players.
Yeah.
And they trained, and then they played the 3 weeks. Now, some teams benefited, like the Washington Redskins, who ended up winning the Super Bowl this season. And then some teams like the Giants, who were the defending champs, did not, because they lost all 3 games.
I mean, you're talking about it. There's a movie about this called The Replacements, but I imagine inside those front office GM rooms, it was like the movie Major League, where you're just like, here's a name. Well, I think he's dead. Well, then mark him off, because you don't know. I mean, this isn't the 90s or late 90s or now, where you can just, okay. I'm not saying you can recruit or draft from the internet, but I think you can recruit or draft from the internet if you really wanted to. Yeah. I don't think you have to go out and see everybody now. You can find, but back then you couldn't. I mean, there's that copy. I don't have this.
But it was good timing though, because like I said in the other podcast, the USFL had dissolved the year prior, so there was actually some talented players.
But but if you think about it, none of the superstars really crossed over. Like, there wasn't that I remember a superstar as a scab. Now, they might have been before or after, but I was actually just bringing. You said that earlier. I don't think any superstar.
I want to say the most famous replacement player that actually stayed was the Saints backup quarterback, John Fourcade.
Yeah, John Fourcade.
I think that was it.
Everybody else. I mean, we talked about that Todd Schloppy, who had never played any professional football that we know of. He's a choreographer, so he obviously had a strong leg. And he played for the Bills for 3 games and then never played again. And that's what it became. It was kind of a farce. It really was. Yeah. It was kind of a farce. So anyway, post strike, Dallas was 3-2. They got to 5-4, but then they collapsed.
Hey, I will say though, like Herschel Walker, his stats he put up, that would be great in this era.
Oh yeah, I mean, he was. Look.
Like you and I talk about, okay, this running back position, it's going to start changing. They're going to call it skill player.
Yeah, that's my belief. That's going to be just skill player in 5 years.
Because they line up out wide just as much as they line up in the backfield. So Herschel Walker, he had almost 900 yards rushing. He had over 700 yards receiving.
In what, like 9 games? Think about that. Yeah. Basically, he was almost at 100 yards total every game. Yeah. He was Roger Craig with a little bit more speed. Roger Craig was more elusive, and that was the negative about Herschel Walker. We'll talk about Herschel Walker here in a little bit. But I was
Roger Craig, Hall of Famer.
I used to say yes, 100%, but then reading more and more, and I start thinking, the Hall of Fame is supposed to be the Hall of Fame. You're supposed to be, in my opinion, at some point, one of the best in the game, a top 2. I don't honestly know if Roger Craig was ever considered that. I don't know, and that's fair, unfair, I don't know. But even Drew Pearson, who took forever to get in, Drew Pearson was an all-pro multiple times. Drew Pearson led the league in receiving multiple times. Roger Craig was always and a lot of it's the system. And maybe they didn't appreciate him back then enough. I think, again, he's a guy in today's era would be phenomenal. 1,500 yards type guy. But I don't know. I wouldn't have a problem if he got in. I'm one of those that I do tend to be like, I'm fine with the Hall of Good getting in because I like to see I think you play a long career and you win Super Bowls and you're part of that. I think there is something to being a part of a championship squad multiple times that should get you in, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense.
I mean, I ain't putting Wendell Tyler in. He was a really good running back for the Rams in the 70s before we went to the Niners.
Yes.
I know you know that. I'm just telling that. So anyway, we get to 88. Dallas collapses. But what's more important, behind the scenes, Bum Bright had bought the Cowboys in, I think, 82, 83, 84.
Yeah, it was our 25-year anniversary.
That's right. And so you and I talked about this again in the previous podcast, but this is to go over. Bum Bright didn't like Tom Landry.
Yeah.
Bum Bright thought he was arrogant. Bum Bright thought he was not willing to change his ways. And I kind of understand part of that.
Yep.
Because when Bum Bright bought the Dallas Cowboys, they come off of 3 straight NFC title games, 2 Super Bowls in 7 years, and then they missed the playoffs, made the playoffs and got shut out, missed the playoffs. So I get totally, it's so funny, perfect timing, because as we're talking that on the video, Jerry Jones is on there. But Bum Bright was losing money. Yeah. And so Bum Bright did not like Tom Landry. All right, so let's go to that now. Let's go ahead and open that gate. And we are way ahead of where we were earlier, so I'm actually kind of happy this happened. So in 1988, Bum Bright sells the Dallas Cowboys to Arkansas oil man Jerry Jones. Now,
who still has an oil and gas company up
to
in
this
Frisco,
day,
Comstock.
He still makes 50% of his money outside of the Cowboys. Yeah. And it's really weird because as much as he's hands-on in the Cowboys, he's one of the few owners that could walk away right now and still make millions and millions and millions and millions. The NFL has become where the owners are actually making 90% of their money off of the NFL, of their program. Yeah. And that's not what the Cowboys, that's not what Jerry Jones used to be. But anyway, so I know everybody hates Jerry Jones because he fired Tom Landry. We talked about that. I can remember all the radio stuff. I tried to find good audio for that, and I just really couldn't. It was all the same stuff we've all seen. But he fired him because Bum Bright literally had it into, I will not sell you the Cowboys unless you fire him. There was another offer that was supposedly higher than Jerry Jones, and Bum Bright would not take it because Jerry Jones said, yeah, I'll fire him. And I know everybody feels now that it was done wrong, but folks, if you honestly, I'm 47. I was 13 when all this was happening, 14. If you're older than that, be honest. Everybody was tired of Tom Landry at that point. Love him. He was a god, but it felt like the game had passed him by. It truly felt like he just, the terrible drafting, all that kind of stuff. And again, it really wasn't his fault when in the 60s he was drafting in the top 10 because they were bad and he built a team to in the 80s where he's drafting in the low 20s. But still, it just felt that the game had passed him by.
So just looking at the record, he just had that one bad season in 88.
Isn't that crazy? Just one really, really bad season.
Yeah. They were old and slow. They weren't drafting well. They didn't have good drafts in 76, 77.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking, I'm like, okay, look, they need to bottom out. They just need to restart.
Well, and that's why he felt that's what Tom Landry felt that's what 88 was. We've bottomed out. I'm going to draft Troy Aikman. That's my future quarterback, which gotta admit, man, I'd love to have seen Landry with Troy Aikman because, honestly, the Norv Turner offense, they threw the ball down the field.
Well, Norv Turner didn't come in until 91, though.
No, but I'm just saying, but that's the offense that Aikman.
And one of the good draft picks they actually did have in the 80s was Mike Sherrard.
Yeah, Mike Sherrard, and let's talk about him. I think he would have been the next 88. Yeah. I think he could have been really special. Yeah. He broke his leg in a training camp. Literally, a guy tripped him and just one of those weird things, and he fell wrong and he broke it. Then he spends the whole time getting healed, and then he's working out in 88 on the beach, and his leg just snaps. Now, it's funny, and I actually meant to pull this up, but the funny thing is Mike Sherrard pops back up later on in the Cowboys history, not as a Cowboy, but as a San Francisco 49er. And he actually had a decent year. I'm not going to claim like he had some kind of all-pro year. Wait, what am I spelling wrong? Oh, there he is.
SH.
He played 86 to 96, and in 1992 he had 600 yards for San Francisco. And I honestly forgot about 94, dude. The Giants, 825 yards.
Oh, he was on the 94 Giant team?
I totally forgot about that.
I thought he was on the 93.
He is 93, 94, 95. And then he finished his career with Denver. So he's a guy that legitimately could have been special.
Yeah.
He played, he was from Oakland, and I can't remember where he played college, UCLA. And he was legitimately really, really good.
Was he on Aikman's teams?
Yes. Oh, no.
It was right before the year before?
Okay. Because he was drafted
87?
Yeah, it'd have been Aikman's freshman
or
sophomore.
I think it was his first year as a starter.
Remember, Aikman was at Oklahoma, though.
So I think he had to spend the 86 sitting out,
down,
and the 87, 88, he was the start. Okay.
So again, some of this is luck when it comes to when teams, get players. But Mike Sherrard alone wasn't going to completely salvage the Cowboys.
But you think 88's the first year of a 4-year run where they have really good drafts.
Yeah, but Herschel Walker, we're assuming they keep Herschel Walker.
Oh well, yeah, because in 1988 he had 1,500 yards rushing.
Yeah, but Herschel Walker was fool's gold. Herschel Walker's issue was he runs straight up and he runs in a straight line, and eventually that's where it got him caught up. Is he's one of those that I don't want to say built like Tarzan, plays like Jane. That's an old high school coach saying, because he played hard, but he was athletic to an extent, and it's one of those where you keep you build the offense around him, and then you're going to keep falling short. But either way, Mike Sherrard's hurt. 88, 3-13. They're sold. Jerry Jones takes over, and then the 1989 season.
This is a dynastic change because there's no more Tom Landry going into 89. There's no more Tex Schramm,
which we'll have to have a show on eventually.
Just him,
about what he did for the NFL.
Yeah.
Because the reason the Cowboys weren't drafting well in the 80s was part of because everybody was doing what the Cowboys did in the 70s, using computer, using scouts. Dallas at one point had the bigger scouting.
The modern scouting combine can be traced back to Tex Schramm.
Yeah, and you still kind of want to, I guess you have to go dig him up. Slap him on the head and why did you share that with the NFL? Because that's something Dallas had, nobody else had. And what we're talking about is, what the draft combine, Dallas, that's what they did. Dallas brought guys in, did the 40 time, caught passes, did all that. And
I think they were just being lazy. They wanted everybody in one place, have some standardized testing.
Well, but I think the two biggest innovations in the NFL was from the NFL East. Joe Gibbs in the weight room, because if you know that story,
no,
teams didn't lift weights in the 70s. You worked out, but it wasn't.
I thought Nebraska was doing it.
Well, yeah, in college, but not in the pros. In the pros, you played, and then when your season was over, you went and worked another job, and then around April, you started kind of getting back into tape. And a lot of them, that's why you got to realize there used to be a time when training camp was 6 games.
Yeah,
and you started in June, and that was the whole reason why. Well, Joe Gibbs and them said, well, why don't we just have an off-season program? Y'all come in and lift weights. And that was the big innovation of the early 80s. And then with how the drafting of the Cowboys of the late 70s, that was the other big innovation. And then the combine. And so if the Redskins and the Cowboys would have kept that shit secret, seriously, that they had a grasp on something that other teams weren't doing.
Yeah.
But eventually it spread through. But so let's go ahead and go 89.
Well, 88, they had, we might as well talk about the draft picks.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since a big reason why they fell off in the 80s was because they didn't really draft well.
Yeah, a lot of it, though, also being where they had to draft because they were so good.
True. So in 88 kind of starts the 4-year run. It starts with Michael Irvin. It starts with Ken Norton, Chad Hennings, who didn't really play until 92 because of his commitment to armed forces.
Air Force, yep.
Mark Higgs, who ended up having a couple of good years with the Dolphins, I believe. Or I might be wrong on that one. And Dave Whitell, who ended up being a good tackle in the 90s, specifically with the Jaguars in the mid-90s. So, and then big losses, Mike Renfro, receiver, he retired. He was a pretty good, solid
he was
Cowboys in the 80s.
Great second receiver.
And then Tony Dorsett, he left to go play for Denver.
Yep.
Now, me, as someone that didn't watch during this time, looking back, I'm thinking, okay, Denver made it to the Super Bowl the last 2 years. You'd think they needed to be more balanced on offense, get a experienced running back who has a grudge, I'm thinking Corey Dillon, 2004, going to the Patriots.
Yeah.
He had
Oh,
like
man, that was a
1,600.
great year.
Yeah, he had 1,600 yards. He was motivated. They won a Super Bowl. And I guess he just didn't really do anything with them. Denver won 8-8.
Well, okay.
Missed the playoffs.
So I think because of what Tony Dorsett had been in the early moments of the Cowboys, if you look at so let me give you his last 3 years. 86, 748 yards.
Splitting with Walker.
Yeah. 87, 456 yards.
Same thing.
88, 703 yards.
But he was the main back in Denver.
Was he? I mean, so in 86, when he was splitting, he had 184 carries. In 88, when he's the main back, he had 181 carries. Okay. Because what did Denver do more?
Oh, they passed a lot.
Yes, they were a John Elway-led team. I think that his rushing gets a little overrated. And also, you got to remember, Sammy Winder. He had 149 carries. So I think people like to go, oh, well, Tony Dorsett, he's like O.J. Simpson when he went to San Francisco, or Joe Namath when he went to the Rams. He really wasn't. He was decent with the Broncos. He wasn't terrible. But as we talked about again in the last show, Denver took a step back that year. They were kind of changing out defensively. Offensively, they were kind of changing. I think John Elway was hurt a couple games because Gary Kubiak, I remember, played a couple games, and they didn't make the playoffs after being a team that had been back-to-back Super Bowls, back-to-back Cleveland epic games. And so I kind of feel like Tony Dorsett unfairly gets labeled like you're the reason why, and it really wasn't. He was perfectly fine.
Okay.
And that's fair because that's a completely different answer than I had in the last show because I didn't have his stats up. And looking at it, I legitimately thought in my mind he had like 300 yards, but he had 780 yards. And
I'll bring up the other point I made in the prior podcast. Another reason why the Cowboys finished 3-13, their worst record since '60, was because of their schedule strength.
Yeah. So I say that. I want to say before you said that, I watched this era. You didn't.
Correct.
I never knew what you're about to say until I read it on the notes. And I had to look back. Not that I didn't trust you, but I was like, I had never heard that. Holy crap. They kind of got screwed.
They did get kind of screwed because it was like a 2 or 3 way tie for second in the NFC East at 7-8. Now the NFL decided to include union games in that record. Dallas did well in those union games. They went 2-1. The one loss ended up being a big point in the 2000 replacements.
Yeah,
movie.
that's the famous one. Everybody, and it's funny because Dallas actually used more players that crossed the picket line. Yeah. But yeah, Dallas actually, I promise you, Tom Landry was having a blast in 1987 with the scab players because that's what he wanted. He wanted to take lesser men and make them great. And I guarantee you, if you were to ask him now, again, like Tex Round, I got to bring him out and slap him in the face. I think that he would tell you that was probably one of a 2-week run that was just absolutely a blast for him. I mean, seriously, because that's what he wanted.
Yeah,
coaches like that. I mean, coaches love superstars to win.
Yeah,
but coaches love the idea of taking lesser and making them great.
Parcells was famous for that.
I mean, that's literally his whole career was that. Yeah. You know, take a 14-point offense, make it 17 points, and you're going to win some Super Bowls.
Hall of Fame. So the Cowboys, they ended up having a second place finish because of the union games. And that ended up, well, not the union games, the replacement games. And that ended up them playing a very tough schedule compared to what they should have been playing. Because if the NFL decided to take out the replacement games, Dallas would have a 5-7 record. It would have put them in the 4th spot, I believe. They would have had a much favorable schedule. They might not have been 3-13. They might have still been like 6 wins. Or, they might have won 6 or 7 games. They wouldn't have made the playoffs. They were getting old and slow. But
yeah, but just to compare, Philadelphia had that same 7-8 record and beat Dallas. That's the famous, Randall Cunningham and all that. I'm sorry, not before that. I'm sorry. I'm getting them mixed up. Again, second time recording this. They beat the Eagles, and that's supposedly what made Buddy Ryan mad, was because Dallas was already using some non-scab, some regular players. But they both finished 7-8 in 87, and then the next year with that schedule, and this is back when that mattered.
Yeah.
With that schedule, the Eagles go 10-6. And what I mean by that is, so now the schedules are so tight when everybody says, "Oh, well, Dallas gets a first place schedule, it's going to be tougher," it really isn't. You're talking 2 games.
Yeah.
You're talking 1 crossover, or now 3 games, because you're talking 1 crossover now, because you still do the the NFC East plays the AFC West, but you're going to play one team in another division in the AFC.
Right.
And where you finish, you're going to play either the same. So if you finish first, you play a first. You finish second, you play a second. Back then, we're talking 5 or 6 games.
Yeah.
We're talking everything outside of your division was decided by where you finished.
And there was 28 teams at this point?
28 teams.
Okay.
And 3 of them finished 7 and 8 and 86 or 87. And when you look at in the NFC East, and when you look at the NFC East that year, you've got Philadelphia, New York, and Washington. And it was Philadelphia, New York who made the playoffs. They were both 10 and 6. Washington and now Phoenix was 7 and 9. Dallas was 3 and 13.
Yeah, this is the first year the St. Louis Cardinals moved to Arizona and became the Phoenix Cardinals. Yep. I think by 94 they changed their name to Arizona.
Was it that early?
I think it was that early.
I didn't realize it was that early, but that didn't matter, because you look at Dallas in 1988, 3 and 13, and these were close games.
Yeah,
losing to Pittsburgh, losing to Philadelphia because they're a division game.
Yeah.
Minnesota, Cincinnati, Houston, Cleveland, and then you look at Phoenix, and they're sitting there at 7 and 9, and they played the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Green Bay Packers, who were not great at that time. So that was back when the schedule mattered. And I'm not trying to act like the Cowboys. Again, and saying all this, the way it ended up happening is actually great. But
yeah,
it did affect where Tom Landry is on. So now let's move to the sell. So Bum Bright wants to sell the Cowboys. He says you have to fire Tom Landry. Jerry Jones says, okay, I'll do it. That was nothing wrong. The mistake that Jerry Jones has made, and he's admitted this, was that him and Jimmy Johnson met at El Phoenix at the time. It's still an iconic Mexican restaurant, but at the time, that's where you went, and talked about it. And lo and behold, a Dallas Morning News reporter, photographer happened to be there. And again, you have to look it up. I'll try to find it and post it. There's a real good video about him talking about, like, I'm calling the state, the newspaper, like, can I do this?
Yeah.
Because you couldn't just do it. You had to have,
this is, early in 89.
Yeah, you had to have approval, and this is non-cell phone. So he's trying to get a hold of people to tell him, hey, you can do this. And so that was the first mistake. The second mistake really wasn't Jerry Jones. It was Tom Landry being I kind of like it, kind of being persnickety about it and be like, oh, I'm going to go to Austin. You're going to have to find me. And so Jerry Jones, instead of just simply calling him, he said, no, I've got to meet him in person. That's honorary. That's great. The problem is it's 6 days after everybody already knows, and then you're now the bad guy.
Yeah.
And Jerry Jones from that moment on has been labeled the bad guy. And I still to this day, and I believe him, I still to this day see people when you talk about Landry and Jones. I stopped being a Cowboy fan the day Tom Landry was fired.
Yeah.
That also goes back to what we talked about in the previous videos. Folks, when you don't understand the Dallas Cowboys and the religion that it is, we can make all the jokes about America's team, and we can say, are they really America's team? Blah, blah, blah. But people literally cried when Tom Landry was fired.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sad moment. Though the video that I recall in my head is him cleaning out his office, and he just looked like a sad old man, just going into retirement, feeling like he doesn't know what to do with the rest of his life.
Yeah.
It was very sad. I mean, I didn't know anything about Landry. I never watched him coach or anything, but I'm like, I know he's a legend, and it's just kind of sad how it all ended. I wish, I think if Jerry Jones and Landry could have went back in time, I think things could have been done better, more diplomatic. Could have been a nice press conference and honoring of him.
That's why I said there needs to be some acceptance that Tom Landry played a part in that he wouldn't allow Jerry Jones.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing that always shocks me when I look up Landry is that he died at 75. It feels like he was older. And that was in 2000. So, I mean, we all talk about
not many more years later. Yeah.
Well, but you talk about all the, the big talk about him was he was starting to lose his faculties.
Yeah.
Like he would forget plays. He would forget players. But we're talking about 63. He was 62. I mean, again, that's where we now realize CTE, because he played college football. He played pro football. He fought in the war. He had 2 plane crashes. I had to explain this to somebody the other day that, CTE isn't a football thing. It's trauma to your brain. And plane crashes, trauma to your brain. And so it always feels like he was older than he really was. 70. I mean, my dad's 77 right now. My dad will be 78 in November. And my dad, you see him on Facebook. I think he remembers everybody. Maybe not. But it's just weird that felt a lot older back then. And it felt like when he died in 2000, like he was 90.
Well, I mean, we have better health care now, so
Well, yeah, a lot of it, yeah. But I still think CTE played.
For
again,
sure.
I mean,
For
just
sure.
a different era. So anyway, all right. So
a second straight year of good drafting. This is the year Dallas got Troy Aikman.
And okay, I want to go back real quick. You brought this up earlier, so I want to give you your due.
Finally,
people, once a year for 28 days, I'll give you your due.
29 every 4 years.
29. Well, do we really count that? Because that's every 4 years. But no, you made a point in the last episode. You made a little bit here, but for all the talk of Jerry Jones, Jimmy Johnson, their drafts, that 88 draft by what was then the old regime before the 88 season, that was a pretty damn good draft with Irvin, Norton, and as you talked about, Hennings. And then 89, they've got the number 1 pick in the league, so it's real easy to.
And you can go back to the early 80s where they got Mark Tuinei to play defense. He ended up converting to a left tackle over the next few years, and then Nate Newton coming from the USFL.
Too fat, too slow.
Yeah, too fat, too slow.
I feel like that's the name of our book.
Right talent, he needed a different coach to get him to get in better shape, because that was always the big story. So when I was a kid watching the 90s Cowboys, training camp was a big deal, mainly because Nate Newton,
and the
talk
mile.
about all the water weight he would lose.
Yeah, and the mile, the Cowboy mile. Yep. That was a big thing that Jimmy Johnson, which actually Landry did too. That's one of the things Jimmy Johnson actually continued was you had to run the legendary Cowboy mile in a certain time.
So, okay, in the 89 draft, Aikman, Steve Wisniewski, great guard for the Raiders in the 90s. Darryl Johnson, great fullback. Emmitt Smith credits him with the reason why he has the all-time rushing record for the NFL.
I honestly feel that there is a point in time where Darryl Johnson gets into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, they're going to it'll be him, it'll be Steve Tasker, Bill Bates, those unsung heroes.
Well, I mean, just as a fullback, because I think there's enough players that will be on the committee by then that will recognize what he was.
Yeah.
I
don't think Sam Gash will get in, but I'm pretty sure Moose will get in.
I think Moose will because of the rings.
But I really think Tasker and Bates should get in.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's another topic for another day, but I totally agree with you on that.
Sepnoski, great center for the Cowboys and Oilers in the 90s. Tony Tolbert, one of my favorite
defensive ends.
Solid. That's the best and biggest compliment I can give a player. He's solid. He would get you 8 to 10 sacks every year.
So I got to tell you my story about that. So before I got back into college and was a broadcaster and all that, I moved up to Dallas and had a kid and all that. And I was living over in the Lake Highlands area. And I would go up to I think I said this in the last show too. I played flag football. This is NFL supported flag football thing. But anyway, I was walking to find a bathroom, and this is in 1994. I'm walking to find a bathroom, and I hear the Lake Highlands, I'm assuming it was the defensive coordinator talking to his defensive line, or maybe it was a D-line coach. And they're watching film of the Cowboys. And he says, I want y'all to find me the one time Tony Tolbert doesn't set the edge. And I just, for some reason, that stuck with me from that moment on. So every time I watch the game, and again, he's a guy that stat-wise will never get in the Hall of Fame. I'm not saying he's a Hall of Fame player, but the Dallas Cowboys don't win 3 or 4 Super Bowls without Tony Tolbert, period. End of discussion. Yeah. As much as Charles Haley was impactful, and he was, Tony Tolbert made Charles Haley impactful, or helped him. I don't want to say made him. Helped him be impactful, because Tony Tolbert did all the dirty things that allowed Charles Haley to rush the quarterback unabated.
And Maryland and Casillas and all.
And we'll talk
Jimmy
about
Jones and all them.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about. I want to jump ahead. So
what are you gonna say?
No, I want to talk Russell Maryland, because you know my point. Worst draft.
Can we get to 91,
yes,
please?
We'll get there. Hang on. I'm hanging on.
So, yeah, in 89, this was the year also, the last year for Randy White.
Yeah.
He retired. Doug Cosby retired. Danny White retired.
Basically, Jimmy Johnson said go.
Yeah, Mike Hegman retired.
Who was a very underrated linebacker.
Yeah. Michael Downs left for the Cardinals that year, too.
Yep.
So that was the big losses. And then also in the supplemental draft, the Cowboys got Steve Walsh, the quarterback for the Hurricanes in the late 80s.
I don't want to gloss over Steve Walsh and Aikman, but I feel like that deserves its own show eventually.
Okay, yeah,
because
fine.
that's a really
Honestly, the only win the Cowboys got this season was against Washington.
Steve Walsh is the
and he was the quarterback. Yeah, so.
And Jimmy Johnson at this time legitimately felt that Aikman was not a winner.
Yeah.
Jimmy Johnson was of that belief that I need winners over great players,
which makes no sense to me. You think of Troy Aikman? You think
now.
I guess he didn't show it back then, but like he had 2 really good years with UCLA.
I just think that I think honestly it was more of and give credit. Sometimes bad moves turn great. I think it was just Jimmy Johnson knew Steve Walsh. He knew what he could and could not do. He knew he was gritty. And again, that was a big Jimmy Johnson kind of ushered in that era of the winner over the great player.
Yeah.
Give me a Tom
Jimmy
Brady.
Garoppolo.
Jimmy Garoppolo. Yeah, Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah.
We joke about him, but
he wins.
Yeah, he wins. When it maybe doesn't matter, but he wins. But yeah, so that again, Jimmy Johnson made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about Bounty Bowl, but we can just go ahead and go into the great train robbery.
Let's go on the trade.
Okay.
The Bounty Bowl. If you don't remember, and I was so embarrassed at this because it happened on Thanksgiving. So Dallas in 1989 is terrible. I still contend they're worse than any of the 0-16 teams because Matt Stafford's on one of them.
No, he was.
That's right. He
was because of that 0-16 season. He got drafted number 1 overall.
That's right. Yeah. Your head, but still, I still contend this 1-15 is terrible.
Agreed.
We talked about in the last one that didn't get recorded. They go undefeated in preseason, and Jimmy Johnson literally was bought. He admits, I bought in. I thought we were going to win, and then the Saints absolutely dominated them, like 24-0 or something. And the Saints all talked about after the game, like that's the worst team we've ever seen. They were rudimentary. We knew their plays before they did it. They're terrible. And so they go into Thanksgiving, and I remember going, I do not want to watch this game. This is not great. My high school at the time was really good, so that's where all the focus was. Texas sucked. Dallas sucked. So let's just work it. And so I didn't even watch this game, but I remember watching it on ESPN. And the reason why I remember is that's the first year I had cable. Literally got cable like a week before Thanksgiving. So this was one of the first things I ever saw on ESPN was the Bounty Bowl. And I remember being so faux mad. Like they should give
Why was it called the Bounty Bowl?
Because allegedly the Eagles put a $200 bounty on Cowboys kicker Luis Zendejas because he, for some reason, to be fair, I don't think Buddy Ryan actually meant it. I think it was more of the like in jest because he's even said, he goes, I had nothing against Luis Zendejas. He was perfectly fine. But they put a bounty that if you hurt him, you'd get $200. And it was very apparent if you watch the game, they were taking more time into killing the kicker for Dallas than they were running defensive schemes. But I remember being like, they should give Dallas the win, that kind of crap. But the one thing is they played later in December. Philadelphia win, and that's the famous snowball game. That's when Jimmy Johnson gets hit by a snowball. That's when Santa gets hit by a snowball. That's when former or actual Eagle players like the late, great Jerome Brown is trying to tell the people to stop.
Is he in the Hall of Fame? I think he should be.
Oh, man. Did he play enough? That's a tough one because he died such a tragic.
Did Terrell Davis play enough? Did Gale Sayers play enough?
I've told you that about Gale Sayers. I've always said that they set a bad precedence with Gale Sayers. I think they set a bad precedence with Gale Sayers. I think they set a bad precedent with how many Steelers from the 70s just because they won. Yep. Like literally the argument was, well, Drew Pearson shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame because he didn't win more Super Bowls than Lynn Swann. You look at their numbers and Drew Pearson's a better wide receiver than Lynn Swann, period. There's no debate about that. I would, again, he's one of those, I wouldn't have a problem, but I mean, he only played 4 years, I think it was. I mean, Terrell at least played 6 years, and for 3 of those years was the best running back on the planet.
Yeah, 95 to 98. He was one of at least the top 5, if not the top running back.
Jerome Brown's problem is because of the position he played, he didn't have, he wasn't like a guy with 40 sacks in 4 years.
Think about what he would have done after the 92 season if he was still alive in the free agency.
Oh, no. I totally agree.
I think he would have I'm trying to think of who he would have went to, because Reggie White went to the Packers in '93, the first year of free agency.
Where Jerome Brown goes.
Where does he go?
Where did he play? Where did he play in college?
Oh, I don't remember.
University of Miami.
Oh, okay.
So where do you think he ends up? Do you think Dallas is?
Oh man,
do you think
I don't know, man, because they already had a deep line,
and that they could add Jerome, dude. Jimmy Johnson was a Miami stockpile. He brought Alonzo Highsmith played as the Cowboys.
But then why was Randall Thrill Hill not a Cowboy?
Randall Thrill Hill. Man, I hated him. You know why I hated him? 1991 Cotton Bowl against Texas.
Yeah,
but
that's one of those years, because like the '85 Cowboys. I think of the '90 Longhorns. You look at that one loss they had in the regular season,
Colorado.
It was a close, 35. And it was a close loss too. Think about what happened if they went undefeated.
Yeah, I know.
It might have been the weakest undefeated team ever.
Speaking of, we're gonna be having a college show this year, and so next year, college A Look Backs will be happening, and the '90 Texas Longhorns is one of that they're up there, as you said. Speaking of the '85
missing
Cowboys,
rings.
Well, no, Miami shoved that ring.
Missing opportunity. Missing opportunity to get their butts kicked in the championship game.
But anyway, but yeah, I think there was a good chance Jerome Brown ends up a Cowboy. I think a very good chance, because at that time, Jerry Jones, this is '91. I think he'd have been. I think if he'd have survived, in case you don't know, he was killed tragically in a car. There were 2 players in that time frame killed in weird ones. Now I can't remember. Is Jerome Brown the one where the ice cream truck, like literally an NFL player got killed because an ice cream truck?
I thought it was like he ran into a tree or something.
Okay, maybe that's what I'm saying. There was 2 of them. But I definitely think that he's a Dallas Cowboy, because that was still when Dallas was willing to spend.
Yeah.
Let's see. He was killed by he was killed in his sports car.
Oh. Okay.
In Santa Monica Mountains. He was skidded out of control after leaving he just bought the car. Skidded out of control after leaving a car dealership in Florida in his hometown. I'll have to look that up, but there was a player killed by an ice cream truck.
I was going to tell you late breaking news. Ray Lewis's son, Ray Lewis III, he died of suspected overdose.
Yeah, I saw that. I actually meant to send that to you earlier. But anyway, so where are we at? We got all the big.
Well, we're talking about the Bounty Bowl '89.
Yeah, the Bounty Bowl '89, and so.
The second one in Philadelphia, Bounty Bowl.
That's where the nose thing. So, but Dallas actually played well. Their defense held Philadelphia to 20 points. If I remember, I'm going straight off the top of my head, and I could be totally wrong.
Okay.
But if I remember, that was like a 10-3 game early.
Okay.
Or for a lot of that game, and then Philadelphia got a field goal and a touchdown, and then Dallas scored a touchdown late.
I love that Vern Lundquist and Terry Bradshaw got pelted as well.
Everybody got pelted. But anyway, so let's go ahead and talk about it.
All right.
The trade, the great train robbery. 4 games into the season, Jimmy Johnson says he came up with the idea of, and there again. So we're doing, it's June. We're doing this one next month. We're going to do 93 and 95 together. 94 we'll save because we're running out of time. Because August I have something we need. We got to do preview shows.
Yeah.
But I just want to go and point out now, if you think that this is going to be all Jimmy Johnson was 100% right, no, because Jimmy Johnson's ego played just as much as a part as Jerry Jones's ego.
Yeah.
There's no reason why this team, these 2 guys didn't stay together. But he claims, and I believe him, he claims that he came up with making the trade of Herschel Walker while jogging with his staff. And he said they threw out numbers, and I remember he thought that at best they might get a couple first rounds and a third. He felt that it's great that Walker's good, but the team was just trash. He's not helping them, and he's right. He wasn't that great. I mean, he was a great running back, but there was just something missing with Herschel Walker, and that you can see that through his career. He has really good stats, but it was never. It was always consistent, but never great. So apparently, by all accounts, the Giants, the Falcons, and the Browns. Good research, by the way, on that, because I knew that, and when I read it, I was like, dude knows what he's looking for. That those were the 3 that was when it was announced that Minnesota, it was like, what? Like that, nobody thought Minnesota was going to.
True, but think about it though. Think about the prior 2 years. What happened with Minnesota? They were an 8-7 team in '87.
Yep, really good.
They destroyed the 49ers somehow in the divisional round that year, and they almost beat the Redskins in the conference championship game to make the Super Bowl. Probably would have won the Super Bowl too. So they were like a pass away from going to the Super Bowl.
And they thought a 1,500-yard guy would be that guy.
Yeah, and then the 88, I think they won the division, made it to the divisional round, lost to the 49ers. So they felt that they were running back away. At least what that Vikings GM Mike Lynn thought.
Now, I want to go ahead and say this right now. We just talked about earlier Tony Dorsett splitting carries. Yeah. One of the biggest mistakes Minnesota did was they didn't just give him the ball. Like, he should have been your guy. In 1990, the year after, he had 10 touchdowns, 198 carries, 770 yards, 4.2 yards per carry, 315 yards. And I'll go ahead and say he was underused. That was the mistake. The trade, you can talk about all you want, but if they would have used him properly, then the trade becomes just, it helped both teams.
Yeah.
And that was always the big issue. To me, as much as I felt that I understood what Jimmy Johnson meant, I still felt that teams didn't use him right. It is always fun that he came back for 2 years. I always liked that he came back.
For 90, was it 95 and 96?
96 and 97.
Okay. So he still missed Super Bowls.
Yeah, he still missed Super Bowls, unfortunately. But anyway, so the genius of the trade, and this is the thing the Vikings didn't understand. Mike Lynn, famously now, I feel bad for him because he did a lot. He built a really good.
He really did.
He built a really good Minnesota team. Again, it's what we talked about before we recorded, and I think we talked about on the show. We're in an era now where championships only matter. We don't talk about the really good teams that just didn't quite win. The late 80s Minnesota were a fun team, and they just didn't win. They just weren't quite good enough, and that's okay. They can still be fun to talk about. But anyway, there's one thing that everybody forgets about. It wasn't Herschel Walker wasn't the only guy that they were talking about trading. Michael Irvin.
Yeah.
Jimmy Johnson is openly talked about. He admitted he tried to trade
his own guy,
his own winner. The guy that wins for me, a winner,
a big player in his 87 title team at Miami.
But Jimmy Johnson valued speed. As much as we make fun of Al Davis, Jimmy Johnson wasn't far behind. In fact, he tried to get to trade to Irvin to Al Davis. And Al Davis was like, he's not fast enough. He's not fast enough.
And he even told him, who are you going to throw it to?
Yep. That's a good point.
It's just hilarious that Al Davis talked Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson down.
Yep.
The voice of reason, Al Davis.
But who
would have thought?
Yeah, really. And I was just thinking the other day, man, Jerry Jones has really turned into Al Davis. At least though, Dallas, again, I can't remember if this is off the air now on the air because we've been recording for so long. We still got 2 other shows to do. For all the talks about not getting past the divisional round, 2014 to now is not a bad era for Dallas. They've literally only missed the playoffs one time in that era without injuries. Every other time they missed, 2015. Well, 2017 wasn't technically injuries, but it was the Ezekiel Elliott suspension. 2018 they make playoffs. 2019 is really the only year that they don't make the playoffs without injuries. And so again, we talk about you can have good eras without necessarily winning Super Bowls. But this is what Jimmy Johnson did smart. Mike Lynn threw a bunch of players at him, and Jimmy Johnson said, okay, I want to sign draft picks to those players. Meaning if we don't keep them, we get that draft pick.
Conditional picks.
Yeah, that conditional pick. Go ahead and go through them.
All right. So
it's funny now.
I mean, it's hilarious to think about it. Okay. So in all, the Cowboys received linebacker J.C. Solomon, linebacker David Howard, cornerback Isaac Holt, who was a guy that stayed.
Good player, too. Yeah.
Defensive end Alex Stewart. And then here we go. Minnesota's 1990 picks, a first, second, and sixth. Minnesota's 91 picks, first if Dallas cut Jesse Solomon, a second if Dallas cut David Howard, and Minnesota's 92 picks, a first if Dallas cut Isaac Holt, a second if Dallas traded Darian Nelson,
who was a good running back.
Who was a good running back for Minnesota for a lot of years in the 80s, and a third if Dallas cut Alex Stewart. And the Vikings, they were going to receive Herschel Walker. They were going to receive Dallas's 1990 third and 10th round picks. Back then, it was 12 rounds.
Yep.
San Diego's San Diego's the third team in this deal. So I'll tell you what they got. San Diego's 1995th round pick and Dallas's 91 third-round pick.
But why did that happen? Because that trade pick, that pick of Darren Nelson had a only if you trade him, and Dallas traded him.
Of course.
So this is where I want to tell all you Jimmy Johnson fans why you need to thank Jerry Jones. Because Jimmy Johnson had the comfortable level of I can trade good, solid players who could win me games, not make the playoffs, but could win me games. I can trade them for future draft choices because I'm not getting fired. Because Jerry Jones is committed to me as the head coach. Again, that's where I'm not trying to claim that Jerry Jones did more than Jimmy Johnson, but I do think I don't think Jerry Jones gets enough credit on that kind of stuff. Jimmy Johnson had the comfortable level of I'm not going to be fired if I don't win 10 games, 5 games. I mean, they went 1-15. We've literally had coaches fired after 1 year now. I mean, you look at Nathaniel Hackett for Denver. He's fired after 1 year. Terrible year.
Didn't finish the year.
Didn't even finish the year.
Yeah.
Jimmy Johnson was able to make those. You don't make those decisions if you don't have that comfort level. Like, it doesn't matter what I do this year. Yeah. We're building for the future. Now, in saying that, I will say this. In 1990, as we now come into that year, I think 1990 gets underrated for what the year it was. Because I think if they'd have had a better offensive coordinator and a better backup quarterback, the dynasty could have started a little earlier.
Yeah, I mean, they were 7-7 when Troy Aikman got hurt.
Yep, 7-7 when Troy Aikman got hurt. They lose to the Eagles. They lose to the Falcons. It's infamous. Babe Laufenberg is absolutely terrible. Yeah. Doug Landville was back at the Falcons now as the head coach instead of the defensive coordinator. He had the grits blitz back again. I mean, that's what the Falcons lived off the blitz. Like, I remember watching a game in like 92. I think it was them and the Saints. And in that game, they blitzed like 88% of the time. That's just what they did. And so that 90 team, you started seeing it though. You started seeing
third straight year with great draft picks.
Third straight year with great draft picks. Of course, Emmitt Smith, Jimmy Jones, Kenneth Gant. Now let's go back to the
Shark.
The Shark. Let's go back to the Vikings draft. That's the one thing. The draft gave good players. It gave a Hall of Fame player in Emmitt Smith. It gave another Hall of Fame player in Darren Woodson eventually. Gave a really good player, and I think would have been a Hall of Fame player in Kevin Smith if he doesn't tear his Achilles. Russell Maryland. Was that a good pick?
For the
number one pick of the NFL that year in 91.
No, it was not.
So when you really look at that draft, it did help, but I do think people overvalue, and I'm not, and again, Dallas doesn't win Super Bowls unless they get Emmitt Smith. So if they didn't get him because they don't do this trade, well, then it's a bad. But still, I think a lot of people in their mind think like 15 starters come from that trade. No, Dallas actually blew a lot of their trade. Now, in saying that, Clayton Holmes, I know you don't really remember. Clayton Holmes could have been a really good player.
Oh, I do. It was good.
The cocaine got to Clayton Holmes. Michael Irvin could handle that and still play. Clayton Holmes couldn't.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. Your favorite player. Now, the one good thing for Minnesota, they got Jake Reed.
He was a great number 2 next to Chris Carter.
Oh, and he would have been a number 1 on a lot of teams.
He would have been.
Dude,
he was a little slow, but he would have been number.
Jake Reed, Carter, and Randy Moss that first year. Oh,
yeah.
So special. That's another show. We're gonna do our own. Should have won. Yeah, should have won rings.
Like a Marvel's What If.
Yeah, Marvel's What If.
OutDrank The Coverage. What If?
What if we're on our third show?
We're gonna steal everything from the MCU.
All right. So now, in 1990, they go 7-9. The funny thing is there was still some players on their team, like Everson Walls and Too Tall Jones and Tom Rafferty. They all left.
Yeah, after 89.
Yeah, 89. Yeah, going into 90.
Yeah. Hey, and kudos. Hey, I'm glad Everson Walls got.
I rooted for the Giants in that Super Bowl simply because of Everson Walls.
The one time you ever did.
Yeah, basically. Well, no,
Did you root for them in the 07 Super Bowl against the Patriots?
No, I didn't care. We watched it. I didn't care. I was at your house watching that.
No.
That was 2011. That was 2011. That was 2011. That was 2011. 07. I didn't care if they won. Great. I'm one of those that I love to see records, so I was kind of rooting for the Patriots. But that Super Bowl specifically, I was rooting for them because of Everson Walls. You brought up something that I totally forgot about, and that's the Pork Chop Bowl.
Oh,
You've put these on your stats, and for the record, let's go ahead and explain it. So the day before the game, the Cowboys lose to the Eagles. At this point, Dallas couldn't beat the Eagles.
Yeah.
And that actually will come into 1992. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that they were winless, but it's just they never won when they needed to.
Actually,
the
very next season, 91.
Huh?
It actually came into 91.
Well, and also 92.
Well, I mean, 92.
Monday Night Football, 92, 31-7.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was like.
But 91 was a big okay. Yes, I agree with you. 91 was a big milestone where they were able to beat them without replacement players.
Yes.
For the first time in like 7 years.
Yes, you're right. You're right. But anyway, in this game, it was 21-20. Dallas lost. But the more famous thing is like the week before, Buddy Ryan and his offensive coordinator go out to dinner, and they're having pork chops, and Ryan's eating his pork chop and probably inhaling it. And Ted Plum, the offensive coordinator, basically saves his life with the Highland
he was
liver.
I think he was a part of another team at this point, but I think Richie Kotite was the offensive coordinator, but Ted Plum was their offensive coordinator.
Does it say it was his former? Okay, I got you.
He either left to coach somewhere else or stayed on as a consultant, but yeah, him and Buddy Ryan were really good friends.
And Buddy Ryan admits that this actually made him chuckle. The one time, so Dallas Cowboy fans are weird. Back then, and you heard about it in our 71 show, they were more of the golf clap. They weren't rabid. That's just how they were. They were rich. They were, went to the game. They went to the game.
I mean, in 71, I mean, it was, Fort Worth was still the big city.
Yeah.
Up in Northeast Texas.
Yeah. But so Dallas fans were very just, tap, tap, clap, clap. But after all this came out and Tech Shrimp dubbed this game the Pork Chop Bowl, the Cowboy fans tossed pork chops and Spam and bacon and all that on the field.
Now, I still wasn't watching football at this point. Did you see this game?
No, I mean, not that I remember.
Okay.
Not that I remember. Again, I will admit, 1990, man, I'm a sophomore in high school playing football.
Winning a national or a state championship.
Playing
Marshall.
But mainly playing Tecmo Bowl.
Tecmo Bowl legend.
Yes, Tecmo Bowl. That's when we figured out Bo Jackson could go back and forth.
And he didn't even need Bo Jackson.
I didn't. But anyway, so that leads into 1991. And I do remember feeling that at least now Dallas is competitive. And in 1991, they get rid of Dave Shula, that's the one I was talking about earlier. He held that offense back a year. Nothing against him, but he shouldn't have been an offensive coordinator. He literally and Jimmy Johnson admits this. Jimmy Johnson admits that basically Don Shula was like, dude, can you hire my kid? And he went for it. And he said he would never do anything like that again. But Norv Turner comes in. And he basically
was he with the Rams?
Yes,
okay.
He was under the Ernie Zampese line, which was basically off the Don Coryell line, except for with a running game. And Norv Turner's offense was simple, just simple: run the ball, throw the ball. It wasn't about being 15 of 16 throwing the ball. He'd rather you be 5 of 10, but 60 yards down the field than 15 and 16 and being 40 yards. He was very big about. If you're going to throw, you throw it down the field. That's why Michael Irvin and them ran deep ins and deep outs.
The big plays.
Yeah, now they're considered big plays. Back then, that was a Dallas pass game.
Yeah.
Slants, deep ins, deep outs, a go pattern to Michael Irvin, a curl to Jay Novacek. We're up 14-3. Let's just play defense the rest of the game, kick a couple field goals. But we can talk about the 91 Russell Maryland. Should he have been drafted number 1? Probably not, but listen to this draft picks. Russell Maryland, Alvin Harper, Dixon Edward, Godfrey Miles, Eric Wilson, Leon Lett, and Larry Brown. Every one of those made Dallas Super Bowl.
And Eric Williams would have been a Hall of Famer had not had that car wreck.
And you could still make the case that he could be a Hall of Famer.
Because he was still solid up until 2000.
Yeah, he came back and still was at least and it actually, honestly, it kind of worked out for the offense because it allowed him to be at right tackle. And that's kind of but yeah, I think Eric Williams could easily be a Hall of Famer. But as you talked about, they still lost to the Eagles. That was bad. That was when you still didn't know about the offensive line. Troy Aikman gets sacked 11 times. They lost to this is the game I knew they were going to be good. The Redskins, Monday night. So Dallas jumps out big. And Emmitt Smith has a huge first half. Like, so huge you thought he was going to maybe break the rushing record.
Hey, this is a stretch where you have all-time great teams for the franchise. So you have the 86 Giants, 89 49ers, and then this year 91. Washington
might be the best of the group.
And you and I had talked off the air. This is the most interesting team to me because they fell off so hard after 1991, and up until last week I didn't realize why that happened. And then I looked at the stats, I looked at the roster from year to year, their starters, and then I realized, so in 91 Washington was all in their late 20s, early 30s. It was their last gasp. It was their last hurrah. It was like the 94 49ers.
Yeah. And also it was Dallas not knowing how to win. Dallas jumped up 21-10. Emmitt Smith had a 75-yard touchdown run in the first half. You just thought, okay, Dallas is going to roll. And then Emmitt Smith started cramping up because Emmitt Smith admitted, I didn't know how to maintain. I spent that whole first half thinking we needed to outscore them now.
Yeah.
And I think this game fundamentally changed how the Cowboys thought.
Emmitt Smith's 22 at this time. He was a rookie at 21 years old. He's still a young kid. And he left early from college just because in 89, Steve Spurrier was hired as head coach.
Yep.
And, if anybody knows Steve Spurrier's offense, he's going to be passing. Yep. Before then, they were running the ball a lot. So Emmitt Smith was like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and declare early. He was going to play his senior year at Florida in 89.
Yep.
Or in 90, I guess.
90.
90. Sorry.
Yeah, 91's a rookie.
So, and think about how that changed. 89 would have been his last year. His senior year. So, think about how that would have changed everything. Dallas would not have had Emmitt Smith in 1990.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So,
so 91, they lose that game, but you realize they're a good team, and then they turn around and beat the Redskins in Washington later that year. That's where Jimmy Johnson throws out an onside kick. You have the Alvin Harper Hail Mary at half.
Didn't Aikman get hurt in this game?
Yeah, that's when Berline stepped in, and Berline led them. And again, it's one of those things where 91 gets lost in everything and relating to the show. But there was another serious quarterback controversy with Berline and Aikman
in the playoffs, right?
Well, in the playoffs and even going into the next season, and that's going to lead.
Oh, I did not know that.
Well, I'll explain what that's going to be. We'll talk about that in the 92 show because it's pertinent too. But so at this point, Jimmy Johnson still is like, I don't know if Troy Aikman's my guy. He is, he isn't. But Berline just won a game. They beat Chicago on the road in the playoffs, and then they lose in the second round to Detroit. And look, here's the thing. This is why fate changes things. If Dallas's one defensive flaw was the run and shoot style offense. Detroit. Houston,
because they played during that season.
Yes, and the only difference when you go, well, what about Buffalo? Buffalo still ran the ball a lot, and Buffalo still turned the ball over a lot.
Yeah,
and that's the thing. If you look at the two Super Bowls, why Dallas won both those Super Bowls, it's turnovers. But you look back at fate, and if Buffalo doesn't complete a miraculous comeback against Houston, I don't know if Dallas beats Houston in the Super Bowl. It'd have been a great game.
Yeah.
It would have been a great game. But I mean, Dallas is deep.
For sure. That almost seems like the AFC title game in 1992.
What?
Buffalo Houston in the wild card round.
Yeah, it really does.
Because Buffalo.
We'll talk about that because I always.
We'll talk about
the 92, but I always forget how that Buffalo didn't win their division, but they were still really, really good.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really stepped up and what I always loved about that 91 Cowboys and the 92, even though I will make the point that it kind of failed them in the Super Bowl, but with special teams. Joe Avisano, the late, great Joe Avisano.
Yeah.
I still would like to have seen what would have happened if Dallas would have made him the head coach instead of Campo. I'm not saying anything would have been different, but I just like to have seen it.
Yeah.
But they had become the team that had special teams plays, block punts. We'll talk about that in 92, first game in the 92 show, the first game. Kelvin Martin, very underrated for that 91, 92 year. I really wish he would have stayed. I think if he stays, you keep Alvin Harper.
Yeah.
And nothing against Kevin Williams. I love Kevin Williams. But I'm just saying the offense changed when Alvin Harper left in 93. But anyway, wild cards, we talked about. Dallas beats Chicago in Chicago. I remember just being ecstatic. I remember when Bill Bates gets that interception to seal the deal. Yeah. I was just like, and my dad's trying to act like, well, the Cowboys win playoffs all the time. And I'm like, yeah, like 7 years ago, you son of a bitch. And why do you hate mom? No, that's a different story. No. hope Dad's not
Emotional
listening.
damage.
But you kind of saw what the Cowboys were going to be because they forced 3 turnovers. They get 3 sacks, and Ken Norton blocked the punt. And they were just too fast, too athletic for Chicago. And to be fair, that was the death knell of Chicago too. That was the death knell.
Because the next year, Mike Ditka and Mike Singletary both retired.
I remember in that game, Mike Singletary. I still remember this day.
92 season?
No, 91 in the playoffs.
Oh, the playoffs. Okay.
I remember. I think it was Stepnoski. Might have been a guard, but just engaging with him.
Yeah.
And it was one of those that for 10 years you saw Singletary throw him off, and Singletary goes to throw him off, and there's just no movement. And Singletary just gets completely washed out of the play. And Emmett just falls right behind that block. That's when I knew, shit, Dallas is about to be really good.
Dude, and we could talk about that 91 season a lot because Houston and New Orleans and Chicago all had chances to be 1 seeds that season. And Houston had a close loss against Washington at RFK that season. There were 3 other teams, like the Hall of Very Good players, the Hall of Very Good teams during this time period. That 91 team, Houston, New Orleans, Chicago, they all had claims to the number 1 seed if they had play their cards right.
Well, you talk about that Houston. Dallas lost to Houston in 91 in overtime. They win that game. They're 12-4.
Yeah, and I don't think they played Detroit during that season. They might have the tiebreaker.
No, they played Detroit. So they got beat 34-10.
Oh,
that's why you knew that Detroit was just a terrible matchup for Dallas. Dude. I would have rather. I said this in 91. I'd rather have played Washington.
Detroit had really good offensive line, and they had good.
Wait, what? Now, I've been taught that Barry Sanders never had a good offensive line and had to run with 42 guys tackling him.
Okay.
But you're right. You bring up a good point.
He didn't have a fullback, but he was great.
He had a really good offensive line.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Dallas that year, their losses, they back-to-back losses, that Redskin game. Heck, if you win that game. They got shut out by Philadelphia 24-0.
Yeah.
Then they lose to Detroit 34-10. They lose back-to-back games, 26-23 in overtime to Houston. 22-9 to the Giants. And that's the game where they basically had fired David Shula without firing him.
Yeah.
Because in that game, Emmitt Smith had like 9 carries.
That's terrible.
And from that moment on, Jimmy Johnson said, we're loading it up. And they went on a 5-game winning streak, 6-game counting playoffs.
Yeah.
And again, I know Detroit loses to Washington. And pretty badly. It's like 41-10.
But Washington was playing on another level.
That Lion team was really good.
They were
that Lion team wins the Super Bowl in a lot of years, and so unfortunately for them, again,
if things changed, if they had won a couple of games, they lost.
Yeah,
it could have been in Detroit. I think if the game wasn't in Detroit, it could have been a whole different story.
That's actually a really good point.
That Washington team was an all-time great team. They only Mark Rippon got sacked, or the whole anytime a Redskin quarterback was under center for the whole season, they only got sacked 9 times. That has to be a record in the modern era.
You know, that just blows my mind though when you think about it. You look at and in saying all that, Dallas should have swept them that year.
Yeah, they should have.
I mean, they really should have swept them that year.
Yeah, it was 2 close losses. But I mean, think about it. They had their best offensive line, and they were in their last year of their prime. The very next year, you start to see the decay. They allow over 20 sacks, I think, that the next year. Charles Mann is not a beast.
Underrated.
He's
underrated. I was can I say that? Can I say that I was a huge Charles Mann fan as a Cowboy fan? I just love to watch him play because I love why are you looking at me like that, man? He was a really good player.
You know the answer.
He set the edge. And if you've never played football as a defensive lineman, that's the word you live by.
That was
a defensive end.
My short career.
You set the
6
edge.
years. Yeah, you set the edge. You do not let anyone get outside you.
My 47-year-old career, 37 on Madden, but still, I still tell my defensive end, you set the edge.
Are you still waiting for the call from Canton?
I'm still waiting, but they'll probably get it wrong. Oh, that was on the other show. Anyway. That's going to do it for the 86.
I never told everybody the Canton story.
Oh, well, you did, technically.
Okay.
Go ahead and tell it now. Go ahead.
Oh, so I went to the Hall of Fame in 2017. That was the year Jerry Jones got inducted, along with other great players like LT, LaDainian Tomlinson, and Kurt Warner. As I was going through the hall, I saw all these little different stats and figures and pictures and all that, and I noticed that they talked about Don Shula winning the with the game that he clinched the all-time wins record for NFL head coaches. And I noticed they had the year wrong. It's on there. It said 92, but I know from watching and a pop culture reference, Ace Ventura, that it was 1993 because it was a road game against the Philadelphia Eagles where I don't know if it was a road game where they host. I know they played the Philadelphia Eagles. That was the game because they picked them up. They did the little cheer and all.
I remember that.
And they're not going to carry their coach
because it was awkward the way he was sitting, like he was almost laying. And he's at that time Don Shula was over tanned and he had those sunglasses he always wore, and he's literally looking like are you taking him to across the field or are you taking him to hospice? Because I mean it could be either one. Yeah. But that's right, and you sent it into them.
Yeah.
And we asked in the last show, and I know we keep saying that, you don't understand. We were literally almost through with the other show before we realized we had an issue. If you've been to the Hall of Fame since 1917, if you remember
2017.
Yeah, let's say 1917. Wow, if you've been since 1917,
World War I.
If you've been since 2017, and if you remember, have they corrected that? Because you never heard back from them.
I never heard back.
I thought that I legitimately thought you were going to email them, and that would be like a viral moment. Like they would be like, "Oh wow, some dude, this random dude emailed us, and we realized he was right," and nothing.
Yeah,
that's just how it goes for some people. Anyway. If you've watched this episode, we appreciate it. If you see on the table, you see it looks like the 1992 playoffs because that's what's going to be the next episode. Until then, he's intern Noe. I'm Terry Bennett. This has been OutDrank The Coverage, brought to you by the Frisco Bar and Drill. I'm drilling down on my drinks on the Frisco Bar and Grill right here on L4 Media.